It's been 7 years with our living fence, and we're going to explain how it's been growing, answer some of your questions, and really talk about some of the benefits that this living fence has provided. So let me bring you guys up to speed on this living fence. So about 7 years ago, we planted this living fence out because the city wouldn't allow us to have a privacy fence. We conceded and we basically decided that the best option, rather than fight them on a bunch of litigations, as silly as that seems, was to plant trees, because the city would not allow us to put up a privacy fence for things like protection of our kids running into the roads, or someone just basically looking into our backyard and seeing what we were eating for dinner. And so we wanted some type of privacy and protection. And the funny thing was that after consulting many different attorneys and lawyers, they basically said, look, you could fight this, but there's nothing that says you can't plant trees. And so I said, you know what? All right, well, so be it. I'm gonna plant some trees. And so we ended up planting this living fence here. Now this is comprised of 42 arborvitae. Now arborvitae are a great option for a living fence. And obviously there's a lot of different types of living fences that exist. But what I really enjoy about arborvitae is how fast they filled out, how large they get. So in our city, if you can have a fence, the limit is 6 feet. Well, I guess joke's on them, because these are way taller than 6 feet now, and they're basically becoming a fence as it is. And so it's kind of funny, they kind of bit off their nose to spite their face. And so I think this is a really cool option for someone that is in our predicament. And we've ultimately made the best of it, because not only did this actually cost us less than an actual fence, but it ended up being more beautiful, in my opinion, than an actual fence as well. And while it's not fully grown, it's still not fully filled in yet, it's been really enjoyable to have for the past 7 years. Now, one of the most amazing things has been the response of this living fence. A couple of our videos have actually gone viral, and we've had news agencies contact us about this. We've had arborist societies contact us about talking about living fences. We've really gotten a lot of kind of unexpected attention from this living fence. And I guess part of it is due to obviously our platform, but a lot of it's due to the fact that it's really not widely talked about. And I think when people start to open up their mind to how cool these actually are, and the fact that they're so much cheaper than an actual fence, people start to ask questions. And so I'm really excited to talk about it. And a lot of you have seen our living fence series, from planting it to updating it and stuff like that. And so I wanted to answer some of those questions in today's episode, because a lot of you have been following along and a lot of you are new, and you guys might be able to benefit from something like this. So one of the most popular questions we get asked is, how close should I be planting my arborvitae to plant out a living fence? In our experience, it is based on a couple variables. One, it's based on the variety you choose, because some varieties are more tall, some varieties are more skinny, some varieties are fat and tall, others are short and skinny. It really varies based on the variety. And the variety we chose were called Green Emerald. Now, Green Emerald is really prized for living fences just like this, because of the fact they fill out fast, they get nice and fat, but they also can get up to 15 feet tall, and they're basically capped at about 15 feet. So they don't require a whole lot of maintenance, and they won't do what's called center split. And that's basically where the branches get really tall in the center and they start to fall down like this, and you end up with some really sparse spots. So I really like them for that. And that's ultimately why we chose them. Now, to answer the question as to how far we spaced ours apart, was about 3.5 feet on center. So that means that there's 3.5 feet and 3.5 feet between each tree. And that's because at full width, these are gonna be about 7 feet wide. And so we wanna make sure that when they're max, they're not actually growing into each other and smashing into each other. We want them just barely touching. And that way they're not gonna have a bunch of dead branches in between, which encourages things like animals living in there, as well as disease. And so right now, obviously, you can see me clear through here, so can everybody else driving by. But the whole point of a living fence is not to have immediate privacy, it's to have privacy over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, where once they grow up, then you're gonna have that privacy. So it's a little bit of a long-term thing that you're doing here, but obviously it has some really long-term benefits as well. Second most popular question we get asked is, how fast do they grow? Well, I'll be honest, I was really surprised. I was actually pleasantly surprised. These have really exceeded my expectations. And in fact, I'll see if I can post some B-roll of the previous video that we did 2 years ago updating you on these, and they were nowhere near this tall. I mean, these have grown in just the past 2 years by probably a good 2.5 feet. I mean, they have really exploded in growth. I mean, these are really getting up there. Some of these tallest ones, like the one down there is crazy. The one down here is probably, check this out, look at this. This thing is, you know, I don't always go out here and stand by these, but like this thing is easily pushing 10 feet, if not taller. And so these were all planted at the exact same time. They obviously all are going to grow at slightly different rates, but one thing that I can safely say is that the speed at which they grow is not going to be a concern because they grow pretty fast. As you can see, this is a prime example of ones that are just starting to touch. Now, those ones over there just aren't fully ready yet. They might need another year or two, but this is what they're going to look like. Like, check this out. You can't see me, and now you can see me. And I think this is a great example of exactly what you're looking for. These are not going to get a whole lot wider, but they're just barely touching. And that's what you're looking for with a living fence. You don't want them to be smashing into each other. You want them just to be touching. But these ones filled out a little faster because of a few environmental conditions, which we'll talk about. All right, so speaking about environmental conditions, as you can see, as we're kind of wrapping around here, these ones in the back of the property have clearly gotten way taller and way more full than the ones in the front of the property. Now, obviously, that is because of a few things. First thing is sunlight. We have this huge maple tree here, and obviously they are able to grow in amongst the maple trees, but they are definitely competing for sunlight. And so over here we get nice and full sun. The arborvitae have grown probably twice as fast as the ones over here. These are still very healthy and they're growing. They're just growing slower. So, so one of the things is putting them in a nice sunny location is definitely going to help them mature a whole lot faster. These, like I've shown you, are already touching versus these are going to need about another year, year and a half or so to start touching, which is fine. Just, you know, it takes a little bit longer, and keep that in mind. Second environmental condition is runoff and moisture, soil moisture. So we have these ones over here on a hill. You'll notice the neighboring property back here kind of slopes off. And so all of the water coming from their property tends to irrigate these trees a lot more. So they're going to get a lot more moisture. Arborvitae are in the cedar family. And because of that, they like a nice damp soil. They don't like to be left bone dry. And so these are getting a little bit more water here than these other trees. And that leads me into the next question you guys all ask, which is how much do you water these? Because obviously 42 trees seems like a lot of trees, a lot of water, right? We're wrong. These actually, once they get established, don't require that much water. They will prefer damper conditions, but once we have actually mulched these really heavily, they don't really need that much water at all. We might only water them on the most dry of dry conditions, and that's just to keep them from dropping needles. After that, they're basically fine. And we watered them very aggressively the first year to get them established. After that, the mulch basically did the rest, and then their dense foliage does the rest as well. It really helps to kind of protect the soil because it's so dense along the ground there. And ultimately, you know, the added water coming from our neighbor's irrigation system helps that much more. But even the ones that are on the front of our property, I should say, that don't get any water at all, they're still thriving. So they don't require that much water. And then the final question you guys all ask is fertilizer. Do you fertilize? And the answer is yes, we do fertilize, but that's only because we want this absolutely incredible green growth here. They will be just fine with very minimal fertilizer. They're pretty self-sufficient. But if you want this super deep green, gorgeous color and faster growth, definitely consider fertilizing your living fence. We use Trifecta Plus. That's what we use on our entire garden. It's good for everything from vegetables to trees. But any type of high nitrogen fertilizer in the spring is going to really encourage that green growth. And you'll notice that right now they don't have this, but they'll form what's called candles. And I guess this is kind of a form of a candle here. All this new green growth here is what's called a candle, and they will form all of their growth basically all at once in the early spring, and then they'll basically be done for the year. So they put on all this growth and then they're done. So the longer you can get the candles, the bigger the tree is going to be that year. And so that kind of applies to upward growth and outward growth. So we try to make sure that we have lots of fertilizer going into the plants. Each tree gets about 1/4 cup a year of Trifecta, and that's just, we want to keep them really going nice and strong. So we do fertilize, but you don't have to. So the next question you guys do ask that I just remembered is pests. Now, when it comes to arborvitae, there really are not many pests that we encounter. And it's not to say you won't encounter any, but here in Michigan, there's not a ton of pests that attack these arborvitae. Now, so there are some pests that attack cedar trees, like coddling moths or gypsy moths. There's a lot of there's a lot of pests that attack cedar trees, but not so many that affect arborvitae. So obviously that could change in the future, but there's not really a whole lot you have to worry about. The biggest thing you do have to worry about is the dead debris in the center of the tree, and that really comes down to variety selection. I mentioned the variety we're growing in the beginning of this episode. That's the variety you should be growing, because there's certain varieties that have denser foliage, and the more dense foliage you get, the more dead debris you're gonna get. These tend to really drop their foliage pretty quickly, and then they grow out. So they don't have a ton of really dense, deep foliage in these trees, which really helps to cut down on things like center rot and just giving a home for animals and other creepy crawlies to live. I think this is probably one of the most popular questions besides the variety and the spacing and the watering is negative feedback. Have we had any negative feedback from planting a living fence? Now, common sense would say that, anytime you do something large like this in the city, it's gonna gain some attention. We absolutely have had tons of attention, but the strange thing is none of it's been negative, which also kind of doesn't surprise me because people have bigger things to worry about than what's on your property, especially when it comes to trees. But I think we're very conditioned to think that people are gonna hate what we're doing, or like that there's always someone watching your property. And that might be true to a certain extent. In a close-knit neighborhood, you are definitely gonna get some attention. This is a pretty small neighborhood that we live in, and I can safely say that all of the neighbors have really loved and very positively responded to what we've done here. We've had nothing but positive feedback, and in fact, a lot of people have actually asked us if we would in fact guide them to planting a living fence as well, kind of give them some advice, because we've actually encouraged people that are in our area in the same situation as us to do something similar. I forgot one more thing. How many trees have died? The answer is 1. We've only had 1 casualty. That's why this guy's a little stumpier than the rest. And this actually has been planted here for about 4 years now. This was about 2 years old the last time we did an update. It was about this tall. So it's grown about this much in about 2.5, 3 years. And this was the only one that died. Out of 42 trees, we only lost 1. And I can contribute that to obviously having good soil, preparing the planting hole adequately, making sure the holes are nice and wide and nice and deep for the root ball, making sure they are watered well, making sure they are fertilized and mulched well, and you should have no problems with die-off. Anyone that loses 25, 30% of their trees is doing something wrong. If you see a lot of dead trees, it's generally not because there's a high risk of killing your trees by planting them like this. It's generally just because of neglect. These trees are pretty hardy, and if you treat them right, you give them the right conditions, they do well. So only 1 has died. So that is another really popular question that I forgot about. But hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully y'all learned something new. I'm getting soaked here. It's the only day we can get out, and it happened to be raining. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments box down below if you have been encouraged through this episode or through these series that we've done on this living fence, if you've been encouraged to plant a living fence yourself and how it's been doing for you. So as always, grow bigger, guys. We'll see you later. Bye.